I don't wanna be. I do. I'm feeling goofy.
Okay, so today I'll talk you about my work in progress Objective-C target. You can get it from this address if you want to just look the code. It has two parts. One is the compiler and one is the Ajax Cocoa externs, where I have some demos and stuff. So some things to cover about the architecture, about some implementation problems. I think Cocoa looks pretty similar with Flash, and I'll show some similarities. And what else needs to be done? So why I started this project? First time was 2 years ago almost. I just wanted to see what's about OCaml, and I started from the ActionScript 3 generator, and I just switched some things, and I got some functions to look like in Objective-C. It was amazing, but then some work got into and I dropped it. And like 8 months ago I started again with some different reasons. So right now in Haxe there's no way to build native apps, native iPhone apps. The speed of alternatives right now are like NME. It's very slow and it's not good for apps. And I really like Objective-C. This is another reason. It's my favorite language actually. And in this process I wanted also to understand everything about Haxe. I didn't go there yet, but I learned a lot. Okay. So right now we can build the iOS app with Xcode, which is the native way, with some HTML5 frameworks and wrappers and all that. Flash I don't know if I don't think it's for apps. NME is also not for apps, it's for games. Unity also for games. So for apps it's only HTML5 and Xcode. In HTML5 you don't have the feeling of a native app and neither the performance. You can see that in the App Store, in the store itself, but it's HTML5 or something. And when you scroll, you can see some lags. It's not performing like a native one. So this syntax that people are scared of. First one is Objective-C, and the second one is Haxe. So that's what I propose to use the Xcode with Haxe syntax. So first one is a function. It's called change color to red. The arguments has two parts. One is this function is like a message. So a message has some names, which is red, green, and blue, and some variables, some arguments, which are RGB. And to call it, you just write a message, change color, red, green, blue. I like this one because if you are coming back to your code after 1 month, you will still understand what's doing that call. So this one is Haxe. I converted the red, green, and blue into arguments, and you just put the numbers there. So why did I tell you this? The second way to write the first function, if you miss the green and blue, it will still be a message, but kind of incomplete message. So you can call it then without putting green here, without putting blue. This syntax is causing some problems in the compiler because I need to find I need to find this red, green, and blue, the name itself, and it was pretty hard to find it. But on the dynamic functions, I don't know if it is, but I don't think it's possible to find it. So if I have a dynamic function, I will not be able to call my Objective-C function. So I think I will duplicate the function with the second notation, and in the second notation to call the first one. I don't like it, but okay. So how it's working? In the middle we have a compiler. It takes your normal Ajax files, some libs, and Ajax Cocoa, which is mandatory. Then it creates headers and implementations, and the plist file. Then also the compiler, it creates the Xcode Xcode project, which is a really big file. And then you have to go to the Xcode and just press run, and you have it on the phone. Now about the resources, so I created a supporting files folder because that's how it's named into a default Xcode project. I just keep the name. You can drop there some PNGs, right now only PNGs, and the plist file, which is the configuration for your project. And one important thing is the PNGs are not copied to your Xcode. It just links them, so you can keep them anywhere in your computer, and it will link them. If you move Xcode, I think you lose the resources. The plist file, sometimes you need to do some more advanced settings, and it will not be possible if you don't create it manually. But this plist file will be copied to your files, because I found it will not work if it does not stay in the same folder. Okay, so that's how it works. You can create the plist file with. I put a lot of compiler flags. I don't know if it's good or not. So I just polluted the. Okay, one of them is Objective-C platform. You can choose between iPhone, iPad, iOS. iOS and Universal means the same thing. It should be OS 6 and generic sometime, but I don't know. You can choose the version of your Objective-C code. Within 4 is the minimum, because I use some blocks and they are available in 4. Objective bundle version, it's the final app versioning. Identifier, it's just the identifier of your app. If you put it in the store at one identifier, you cannot change it later. the owner, your name, bundle name, it's the name that appears on the screen. Supporting files is the path to your resources. Objective-C lib, it's and framework are maybe confusing. Lib, it's the path to a custom framework, like Facebook framework. And Objective-C framework, it's a native framework. If you want to add it in your final file, you have to use this. Linker flag, it's also specially for the Facebook framework, which I used and I need it. So it will add some linker flags. You can choose your supported orientations. Okay, now about the file itself, the generator itself. So I started from the ActionScript 3 version. Then I got from the C++, I learned about some modules, how to use the modules. I saw how to split one class in header and implementation. It has 3,400 lines so far. Between almost 1,000 are only the Xcode file, and this is too much to see 1,000 in, and you use it rarely, so I try to split it without success. I use camel case for the functions. Also, I think there's no camel case in the entire compiler. Okay, and yeah, I use, when I try to find some types, I always put this block of code. So I have a lot of blocks of matches to find just the type, and I print to the screen every time what type it has. Then I run my compiler and I see what result I get. Then I'm going to that line and I put another block with what's necessary. That's how I work. I don't know. So it has a lot of blocks like this. So now, how was this possible? So I convert the string to an NS mutable string category. A category, it's a class with some methods, and if you import this category into a file that you are using, it will add the methods you define here to that class. So what I've done here, I implemented the string methods, and the NS mutable strings will have string methods right away. So there's no need for boxing or creating my string or something. An NS mutable string in Objective-C will be the same in the compiled code. An array is the same. Anonymous objects are dictionaries. These are not quite working now. Date, it's NS date. Numbers are just numbers. But if I want to use them like objects, like assigning a null to them, it will not work right now, because primitive cannot take nil values. Static was, after I saw how can I do a static, I don't think I'll use them anymore. So a static, it's a static variable, but you cannot access that variable from outside, so I put a getter method, and in the getter method I'm checking if that variable has a value. If not, I'm putting the default value. So there are already too many calls. And the setter is just getting the value. This is a little faster. The reverse. No, it's okay. The getter sets the default value and the setter just sets a new value. Dynamic functions are even harder. I use a combination. So when you define a dynamic function, I'm defining a property from it. I'm also generating the function itself, how it was written in Haxe. And in the header of this function, I'm checking if I have a new function set to that dynamic function, and this is I'm calling the block. So that's the idea. I'm calling the block, and if there's no new block defined, I'm continuing the code as it was written first time. The constructor, it's in Objective-C you have many constructors, and they all begin with the init. So when you instantiate a class, you have to allocate some memory, then init. But if I have many inits in a class, the problem is I cannot init it. I cannot call the simple init, then call the other init again, and it's hard to ignore one of them. So I decide to ignore the other custom inits. So if you have like an UI image, you can init that image with init with image, and if I just call this init with image, it will be in Objective it will be alloc init then init with image, and it's not possible. So we have to put the image property separately. To access an array, there's this method object.index, and of course if you are trying to get a value that it's outside the bounds of the array, it will not work, it will crash. So I created this new method that will check your length, and if it's not enough, it will add some values, it will add some objects there. The optional arguments of a function, this again, they do not exist in Objective-C. So in the header of a function, I'm checking if that argument has if it's not null. If it's null, I'm setting the default value that you set in Haxe. I think it works again with primitives will not work. A class, it's an interface plus an implementation. An interface, it's a protocol. Enum, it's an enum, but the complex enum are not working. Some things are not, it was not possible to do them without adding some classes. classes that are not really doing anything, they are not compiled. So sometimes you need a selector in Objective-C, and I added this class, new cell, and you pass the reference to a method, and it will create, from that method, it will create a selector, and yeah, it works. I added some shortcuts to create a rectangle. It's this long static method from the right, CG geometry, CG rect make. So I just made a shortcut new CG rect. We have support for concurrency programming, which is really useful. There are just some C methods. Again, this class is not compiled. Iterator, I'm still having problems with the iterator. I think I need a class for it too. Yeah, so in Objective-C, null is nil. You cannot add nil to an array into an array, so I am adding the ns null null. It's a static call. That's how it's done. Yeah, and also about nil, I really like this. I think not everybody. If your object is nil and you are trying to call a method on it will not happen anything. Your program will not crash. Yeah. Dynamic, it's a problem. Yeah. Yeah, dynamic doesn't mean that I can hold primitive numbers. I have also that problem with calling a function that is defined like dynamic. I mean, the object is defined dynamic and you're trying to call a function that you know for sure that is there. It will not work. Yeah. So I added some metadata. I always try to avoid metadata, but it was necessary. First one, it's import. It's importing normally some files from your project, and include. It's also an import, but it's importing from file system. This was necessary for the exters. I don't think you need it. Selector, again, in Objective-C, you can have, because it's a message, a function is a message, many messages can start with the same name, but that name in Haxe will be the name of a function, and it will not be possible to have many functions with this name. And I add this selector metadata, and the compiler will look to this selector, and when it's calling, when it's translating the function, it will add this new definition. Like I have in a table view, for example, its delegate methods like table view did row select, table view number of sections. They all begin with table view, but I just redefine them to the second part of the message, and I add this selector to switch them back. Framework, it's it's used in any extern, because when I'm using a class in Haxe, I'm looking at the name and I'm importing it. No matter what, I'm just importing all the classes you've used in one place. But the Cocoa classes, you cannot import the Cocoa classes because they are all in the framework. You have to import the framework itself. So if you put this framework metadata, will ignore the class name and will import the framework itself. Weak, I'll tell later. C, it's for calling. It's for switching the call from Objective-C style to a C style. We need this for some classes because not all of them are Objective-C style. Category I told you once. Okay. Getter body, it's also used in a category because in a category you cannot have properties, but you can have only the getter of that property. So I'm just adding this metadata to get the property. So what's not working now? There are a lot of things that are not working, but this one especially I didn't even look at very carefully. Reflect the type, XML, it's okay. I really need to look in the boxing the primitive values into NS numbers, that's how they're called, NS numbers. That calls to dynamic functions, the complex enums. I'm afraid to lose the simple enums and go all into complex enums just for something that was possible in Objective-C. But maybe there's a way to use them both. Yeah, you cannot concatenate a string with numbers to not work. And if you want to import one file in that file you are importing again the first file, it will not work. I think in Haxe it's working, but in Objective-C will not work, and I need to see how can I fix it. Memory, yeah. People, I think they are scared of the memory, and I choose the automatic reference counting. I think this is the future of in Objective-C. They are even getting rid of the other method from OS 6 programming. In OS 6 was possible with garbage collector, but right now they recommend to use ARC. Yeah, if you really have a leak or something, we have this weak metadata. Yeah, the Cocoa, which is Cocoa, it's a collection of frameworks, and they are so big. I think they are bigger than anything we have in Haxe right now. So what I recommend is to not reinvent anything because it has anything. Otherwise you'll get with this. Okay. So HexCore is the hex lib. It's not on hex lib it's not yet. I split it in. There were many things I was thinking, but I split it finally into 3 packages. One is Objective-C, where I have some basic stuff like foundation framework, where you have the strings, arrays, and anything. The iOS, it's anything that it's from the iOS but is not common to the OS X. And the OS X the same, it's only the OS X part. Yeah, and the lib also contains default supporting files. If you do not define in your compiler flags new one, it will read from here. And I have some launch images and icons there, so you can have by default something. Each package has a lib, and I try to put some useful stuff in each of them. The iOS has the attach, like in Flash. You can just get an image to display on the screen. And to display an image is quite a long code, like 2 or 3 lines. Yeah, to find if you are on an iPad or an iPod, to display an alert. These are useful things. Yeah, so this is very important in Aegis Cocoa. The MVC, which is built in. If you want to, you really need to go along with it. If you start reinventing it, I don't think it's possible. So you have a controller, knows about the model and about the view and nothing more. But how can you communicate between them? It's different. So let's say the view is a button. There's a way for the controller to get some messages without the view knowing about anything, and it's called the target action pattern. You are just registering from the controller to this target action, and yeah, when you touch the button, it will send an action, and the controller will get it. Another way of communicating is with delegates and data sources. This is an example in a table view. The table view needs to know how many rows it has, for example. So it uses these data sources, and it just asks the controller how many lines I need to display. The delegate example of a delegate is that this row of a table view was pressed, so you'll get a message like did select row at index, what index it has. So again, the view doesn't know anything, it just sends some messages. But the thing is, from a controller you need to implement this the protocols for these methods. They have some protocols. For the model, it's a little different. You can listen for the key value observer. So when something changes, the controller will know. So the ViewController it's a UIView controller. It's when you are creating a small MVC, you need to extend this ViewController, and it has a life cycle, which is important. So you create the ViewController, you can get notified when it's displayed on screen, when was loaded, when it will appear, important when you get some memory warnings, you'll get some notifications there, so you can clean something. And also when it's disappearing from the screen, you can get notification. The dialog method is not really necessary with the arc, but you can implement if you want. So what's some similarities with Flash? A sprite is a UIView. What's different here is the sprite has X, Y, width, height properties, but the UIView does not have them. It has a property called frame, and the frame has an origin, which the origin has some X and Y properties, and the size the same. And it's, if you just want to change one of these properties, it's much longer to write. But it's the only way. You cannot write a sprite frame origin X and change its value. It will not work. You need to get the frame, change it, and assign it again to the view. The events are delegates, as I said, and there's a notification center. You can just register to events from anywhere, and you can get notified anywhere. It's not very useful, this one. Not touch events. In Flash, you have to register for the event, but in Cocoa you have a function. When you are extending UIV, it already has this function. You have to override it, and that's it. You don't have to remove anything after that. This is the target action I was saying. For this one, you need to remove the target action after you use it. Otherwise, I think we'll get some leaks. I don't know. The CoreAnimation, it's a powerful animation engine. You should use it. You do not need to get your Flash animation engine to, as the name says, it's a core framework of Cocoa, and I think it's using the hardware acceleration, so you should use it. One thing to note here is if you're doing an animation, you are setting some value that you want to get to, but the values will be already set. Just the animation will change over time. If you are trying to read the values in the middle, it will not be anything. It will be the last value you have to get to. So you have to take care if you debugging. We have traces. They work like in any target. You can get the class name, line number. You can use the native NS log, but you have to use untyped. Is not and in your final app you should use the instruments to see what's happening there. Now, I made some tests. I compiled all the unit tests I found in the Haxe source. It takes like 0.8 seconds. If you're trying to compile NME app, we know how long it takes. The size also, it was very important. It's very, very light. It's just some text files and that's it. I'm comparing with NME because it's almost the only way to build something for the iPhone now. Maybe there are some more, but I made some tests with the NS mutable strings, which was this was a native test, not in Haxe. So I tried to put 1 million to create 1 million NS mutable strings. It takes like 2.5 seconds. But if you create 1 million strings, simple strings, it's way faster. I would like to use the string, but the string is not mutable, so. But anyway, I don't think this is such a problem. I don't think anyone works with so many strings. Yeah, I try to add them to an array. It's also much slower. So this is how long I worked on it. It's from October last year. This is I worked most of the time on this, and you can see here a gap of 1 month. It's okay. I just switch countries and I work some native stuff. So I need to do the standard library. I think this is the first thing I'll start work on. To finish the externs, I choose to make them manually just because to preserve the documentation. Apple write it there. So if you are going to the external, you can see some documentation there. I want also to skip the Xcode step of manually pressing run, and also maybe I'll be the first one to use in my framework, which I don't think anyone uses it, but I use it. Okay. Yeah, maybe like I want also to add some support for more resources. And this will be nice. I don't know if it's possible or not, but it will be nice to work on Windows and send it to a server that will compile for you, and you get it on the phone to test flight. I don't know. Thank you very much. If you have questions.
So I was curious, how many kinds of applications you felt, how many kinds of applications you could build right now, and if you've done any work to support CFFI?
Yeah, I was actually wanted to show you some demos, but it's on the phone, so I think it needs to. You cannot do too many. I have a Pirate Pig. And it was an app that I worked on. It was just a table view with the galleries from from your phone, also from your Facebook. It can get any gallery from these two sources. You can see these files, you can see the pictures themselves, and this is where I stopped. But the original app was creating a slideshow from them. But I didn't done that part. I'm not sure if it was quite possible.
Okay.
But yeah, you cannot do.
That makes sense. So if you wanted to build something using UIKit,
you
then
can,
potentially you're good. Or
yeah.
if you wanted to build something, you might still run into edge cases where there's some part of UIKit that would require something special. But doing generic applications that aren't using Apple controls probably not really supported.
You cannot, yeah.
Okay.
After I finish the standard library, I think.
Hello. One question I have is, how much part of the language are you planning to support? I mean, you say, for instance, that you cannot store basic types into dynamic. And is it something you have ideas or to fix, or is just you think that it will not be possible? Because there's two parts in Haxe. There is somehow the libraries, or the standard library, and there is the language features. And so do you plan to, at some point, maybe 10 years, I don't know how many time it takes, to get all the language features working?
Yeah. I want to be everything. So if I'm working on the standard library, I need to have everything. So when that standard library is finished, I think it will have everything.
I mean, if you really just use Cocoa or Foundation Framework or whatever it's really called, and restrict some of the Haxe features, it really works normally. I mean, you could write Cocoa apps without big problems. Where is it right now? I mean, not so much caring about the standard library, but really about the stuff that is there on the Mac already or on the iOS.
Yeah, you can call almost anything from Cocoa. Yeah.
Okay.
It will work. Yeah.
Okay. That's cool.
But this one, like string plus an int, it's not part of Cocoa, so this will not work.
Okay, but that's dynamic. I mean, normally the compiler would forbid.
Yeah.
No, string plus int. Okay.
I mean, string plus int will be converted to your native code.
Okay, I understand. But okay, cool.
Okay, thank you very much.